Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, a U.S. military ship docking at a strategically vital port in Asia, with the head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command meeting Cambodian military leaders on board. It's sending a clear signal to China. Britain's Prime Minister heads to China on a state visit. What does he hope to achieve and what's at stake? South Korea is urging lawmakers to pass a U.S. investment bill as President Trump signals higher tariffs on Korean goods, putting pressure on Seoul to act quickly. Taiwan may take lessons from its neighboring partner. And Texas further protecting its citizens from the Chinese Communist Party. It's expanding its list of technologies prohibited for use by state employees. The United States is deepening its military ties with Cambodia, home to a strategically vital port that could tip the balance of power in Asia. China has its eye on it. Now, a U.S. military ship is docking there, with the head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command on board, meeting with Cambodian military leaders. Admiral Samuel Paparo, the head of U.S. forces in the Indo-Pacific, met with Cambodia's defense minister and the armed forces chief aboard the USS Cincinnati on Monday. They discussed the U.S.-Cambodian defense relationship. The two countries vowed to work shoulder to shoulder to uphold a free and open Indo-Pacific. The USS Cincinnati has been docking at Cambodia's Ream naval base since Saturday. This is one of 37 U.S. warships that have visited the port over the past 2 decades. But this marks the first time a U.S. Navy ship has docked there since Chinese-funded renovations were completed last year. The renovation has fueled concerns in Washington that China, Cambodia's close ally and top provider of aid and investment, may have been granted exclusive access to the base. Reports of a potential 30-year agreement allowing Chinese military use of the site have stoked fears that a global Chinese military base could be taking shape. Cambodia's government has denied exclusive Chinese privileges.
At this location, our government has worked very hard to build this port so that all foreign vessels that wish to dock in Cambodia can do so.
While China has more warships than the U.S., it only operates one official overseas military base located in Africa. The U.S. has 750 around the world, allowing Washington to project power around the globe. But a shift is underway. China already controls 2 additional ports, one in Pakistan and the other in Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, it's building another deep sea port in Myanmar. If Beijing manages to transform them into fully operational bases, plus the port in Cambodia, it could project power across the Indian Ocean. Cambodia is a close ally of China and has long had tense relations with the U.S. Washington has called out the Cambodian regime for human rights abuses and political repression. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer heading to China on Tuesday, becoming the first UK leader to visit in 8 years. He'll be joined by 60 leaders from British businesses, universities, and cultural institutions. Starmer is aiming to secure more Chinese investment in the UK. He's also trying to get more access to Chinese markets for British financial services, cars, and Scotch whisky. Britain's economy is facing a slowdown, with GDP growing at just 0.1% in the 3rd quarter last year. Meanwhile, Starmer's also facing leadership challenges. He has a fine line to walk, balancing relations with China, the U.S., and the European Union. In a Bloomberg interview, Starmer said the UK could meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping without harming relations with the U.S. He added that the UK has very close ties with the U.S. and wants to maintain that relationship. Starmer noted, however, that ignoring China wouldn't be sensible. Critics of Starmer say he's naive about China's threat to Britain's security. By comparison, Starmer's predecessors blocked Chinese investment in sensitive telecom infrastructure. They have also kept Beijing out of new UK nuclear power projects. Meanwhile, human rights groups are calling on Starmer to discuss Jimmy Lai's case with Beijing. Lai is a pro-democracy media tycoon who has been found guilty in a Hong Kong court. He's also a British citizen. Rights groups say the case shows how the Chinese regime's national security law is being used to silence critics. A Chinese spying operation has been hacking the phones of senior London officials for years, including those close to prime ministers. That's according to The Telegraph.
According to the outlet's report yesterday, the hacking exposed officials' communications with Beijing between 2021 and 2024. Telegraph cites intelligence sources in the U.S. Some of the officials targeted include the closest aides to former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak between 2021 and 2024. It's unclear whether the breach included the mobile phones of the prime ministers themselves. However, the Chinese spying operation, known as Salt Typhoon, is expected to be ongoing, raising the possibility that the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, may also have been exposed.
President Trump plans to raise tariffs on South Korean imports from 15% to 25% related to autos, lumber, and pharmaceuticals. In a Truth Social post Monday, the president said South Korea's legislature was not living up to its side of a deal with the United States. In response, South Korea's finance ministry announced Tuesday that it will urge lawmakers to speed up approval of the $350 billion U.S. investment bill. The trade deal was reached between the two allies last year.
South Korea's parliament now needs to change the signal it has been sending to the United States. They need to quickly send a signal that they will soon implement a special law for investment in the United States, and that, on that basis, they will invest according to a set timetable for U.S. investments. In particular, the administration also needs to take a more active role as well.
Meanwhile, South Korea's presidential office, the Blue House, held a meeting Tuesday to discuss possible solutions. However, the Blue House said Washington has not formally notified Seoul of any decision to raise tariffs on South Korean goods. South Korea's industry minister, who's currently in Canada, will travel to Washington as soon as possible to meet with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick.
If the tariff is raised, that would be very bad for us. We were agreed to put 15% tariff, both the reciprocal tariff and the automobile tariff, and that 15% rate is neither lower nor higher than for other countries. It's an equal, fair level. But if it is raised to 25%, we lose that 10% price competitiveness, and export volumes will decline by about the same amount as the lost competitiveness. And South Korean companies are likely to face immediate uncertainty.
The trade agreement was submitted to South Korea's National Assembly last November and is still under review. According to local media, it's likely to pass in February.
Because this is a national interest matter, we would appreciate it if the People Power Party would refrain from unnecessary and unproductive debates over whether the measure should take the form of ratification or statute. Instead, we urge them to actively participate in and cooperate with the legislative process so that the tariff issue can be resolved.
Whether it is ratification or a special law for U.S.-related investment, the government and the ruling party should have submitted some form of request or proposal to the National Assembly. Until now, there has not even been the slightest communication on this matter.
The move against South Korea underscores a broader approach by President Trump, who has frequently used tariffs to advance his policy agenda. On Saturday, he threatened Canada with a 100% tariff if it struck a trade deal with China. In response, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said his country was not pursuing a free trade deal with China and has never considered it. Meanwhile, South Korea's experience serves as a warning to Taiwan. Some Taiwanese experts are urging the ruling party and the opposition to engage in constructive dialogue, warning that continued gridlock and infighting in the country's parliament could lead to consequences similar to those seen in South Korea. The U.S. and Taiwan reached a trade deal on January 15th that cuts tariffs on Taiwanese goods from 20% to 15%. In exchange, Taiwan committed $250 billion in new investments in the U.S. tech industry. The island nation will also guarantee an additional $250 billion in credit to facilitate further investment. Some Japanese officials have been quietly urging fishermen and local politicians to avoid a group of remote islands. The islands are known as Senkaku in Japan and Diaoyu in China. According to Hitoshi Nakama and 3 others with knowledge of the requests, the goal is to avoid escalating a diplomatic clash with Beijing.
Hitoshi Nakama says he's not just a fisherman. He sees himself as a frontline defender of Japan's claim to disputed islands in the East China Sea. Sailing over 100 miles from his home port on Okinawa's Ishigaki Island to the Senkaku Islands, Nakama dodges Chinese Coast Guard ships to fish in the contentious waters. But since late last year, some Japanese officials have been discreetly urging him and his peers to steer clear of the islands. That's according to Nakama and 3 other people with knowledge of the requests. Japanese Finance Minister Satsuki Katayama was a long-term advisor to the nationalist group that supports and funds Nakama's voyages. But at a meeting in Tokyo on December 19th, Nakama says she appeared to put pressure on him to stay away from the islands.
What Minister Katayama said was, small incidents can grow bigger and lead to war. So I think what she was really saying was that she didn't want me to go to the Senkaku Islands.
The islands, administered by Japan but also claimed by China, have long been a flashpoint in relations between the 2 Asian powers. Relations soured last year after Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi told lawmakers that Japan could take military action if China attacks Taiwan. The Chinese regime used her remarks as a pretext to retaliate against Japan, including trade restrictions and flight suspensions. Tokyo is seeking dialogue with Beijing to ease tensions.
Texas is taking new steps to protect its citizens from the Chinese Communist Party and other hostile foreign actors. The state is expanding its list of technologies prohibited for use by state employees.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott said, quote, "Rogue actors across the globe who wish harm on Texans should not be allowed to infiltrate our state's networks and devices." Abbott added shopping platforms Shein and Temu and the business-to-business marketplace Alibaba, as well as several more technologies to the Texas blacklist. Now, the governor established the Texas Cyber Command in June 2025 with the signing of a state House bill and a $135 million investment. Abbott accused what he called, quote, hostile adversaries of harvesting users' data through AI as well as other applications, putting Texans at extreme risk.
As China's shadow continues to encroach globally, its influence reaches far beyond its borders. It monitors and pressures dissidents, ethnic minorities, and religious groups abroad. China has even operated Chinese police stations inside other nations. So what's being done to challenge it? While there's been some legislation passed at the state level, we want to hear from you. We're collaborating with Nick Eftimiadis, who specializes in Chinese intelligence operations. He's reviewed over 850 cases of espionage, IP theft, and trade secrets by China's intelligence services around the world. His latest effort focuses on the CCP's campaign of transnational repression. When it comes to the specific patterns of these overseas operations, the who and the how of the targeting, we need your help. If you're the target of a CCP transnational repression campaign, you can fill out this anonymous survey by scanning the QR code on the screen or by going to the link in the description box down below. It's completely anonymous for your safety. And with enough people speaking out, governments can better protect their populations, businesses, and targeted groups worldwide. Thank you for your continued support. Coming up, in an unprecedented move, a top general in China has been purged. What does it mean for the U.S. and for the world? The panel breaks it down. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. As reactions continue to pour in over China's latest military purges, this time of 2 top generals, what does it mean for China, Taiwan, and the U.S.? To discuss it, we spoke with Michael Lucci, founder and CEO of State Armor, and Nathan Su, investigative reporter for the Epoch Times. Michael, starting with you, diving right in here, how are you reading this latest series of investigations, purges in China, this time for the country's top generals?
There are 2 things I'd say about this. First, there is real tension between Chairman Xi and his military. Obviously, he's purging nearly everybody in his leadership of the military. The reasons for that, I think that there's a lot to debate and consider around the reasons why there's that tension. But I would flag the second point I'd like to make here is there's pretty obvious propaganda being promulgated within the United States, in particular through the Wall Street Journal, about what might be happening in the inner circle of Xi Jinping. They're saying that he's selling nuclear secrets to the United States and some other conjecture like this. The lines in the Wall Street Journal are being rejected by pretty much everyone who's analyzing these issues. So there's real tension between Xi and his military leaders, But a lot of the narrative that's being seeded across the United States seems to actually be used to benefit Xi Jinping himself to consolidate power.
And Nathan, you have a unique perspective on this, having come from a military family in China. Now, with your reporting work to expose the Chinese regime's influence around the world, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I think Xi Jinping is actually trying to replace the most of the Chinese government and party and military officials. That's what he's trying to do. What the situation facing him, it's very much similar to what's facing Joseph Stalin in the 1930s. You know, Stalin facing a lot of people that's left from the Tsar's era, while Xi Jinping is facing pretty much every aspect of a Chinese government, party, and military official who climb up the power ladder in the past 40 or to 50 years of time after China opened to the free market and start their market economy. And in the eyes of Xi Jinping, and they are all corrupted to a certain extent, while Xi Jinping trying to lead China going back to the fundamental communist ideology. He trying to replace a lot of them. So that's why we have seen in the last few years, Xi Jinping trying to actually encourage the fight, the power struggles among officials in different factions in China, either government or party or the military. So he can find a reason to either replace them or purge them as quick as possible.
And Michael, we've seen how certain nations put trust in negotiations with the Chinese regime, and some speculate that it could become the next future global leader. Do purges like this of two Chinese generals serve as a reality check of how unstable China's future under this regime really is?
Well, Tiffany, it's actually a really incredible example. So you have the Prime Minister of Canada talking about making a trade deal with Xi Jinping, as he is, as you're noting, purging his military leaders. But this is nothing new. If you look at the track record of Communist China since just the COVID era, they unleashed a pandemic on everybody. Wolf warrior diplomacy, hoarding PPE, attacking Taiwan, trade war all across the board. So they've been the source of global instability. They backed Putin's invasion of Ukraine. They backed the leaders of Iran. They backed the leader of Venezuela. So pretty much everybody who's causing trouble throughout the world is being backed by Communist China. And as we're mentioning here, they are purging their own leaders at the same time. So it's actually quite insane for global leaders, such as the Prime Minister of Canada, to turn to Communist China to make some sort of trade deal, which China has never honored any of their trade deals anyways. But this is occurring amidst a time of tremendous turmoil within China, and as the United States is fortifying against China across the globe.
And Nathan, your thoughts on if this latest purge is a reality check for people in countries who might see as Communist China as a future global leader?
Well, I think that in the leaders of the Western world, we need to clearly have a clear mind that we need to treat China as our enemy, not competitor. China has been in war with us, the unrestricted warfare, ever since the 90s. And while we have been dealing with China using the rules, regulations, legality, all these things, you cannot rely on these things to win a war. That just doesn't work.
And Michael, how should the U.S. be responding to this? Does it change the U.S. approach to relations with China?
I think that the United States should prepare for China to start a war in the Indo-Pacific. And then President Trump's national defense strategy points to exactly that, wanting to deter war through strength. And most specifically, he says he wants a denial defense on the first island chain. So that would include from Korea to Japan to Taiwan to the Philippines. So a denial defense so that China cannot invade one of those neighbors, cannot break out from the first island chain, and cannot really disrupt all global trade that goes through the Straits of Taiwan, the South China Sea, and otherwise. So I think that President Trump is putting pressure on a lot of China's allies, obviously Venezuela, Iran. President Trump is working with NATO to fortify the Arctic, that's Greenland. President Trump's trying to get back control of the Panama Canal. putting trade restrictions on China and trying to get our allies to do the same. So I think that what he's doing is generally the right thing, which is get supply chains that are separate from China, get allies ready to deal with China, and really fortify the first island chain against a potential invasion by China.
And expanding on that, Nathan, this is seen as the highest profile purge to date of senior military leaders inside China. It also involves the last two who had real war experience. How could that impact a potential Taiwan invasion?
Well, I think what Xi Jinping trying to look at, it's not seniority and experience. And that's in the past that he has to choose, these people with top seniority, top, more experienced, but he actually doesn't like them. So he find a way to try to replace them as much as possible, as quick as possible. It's really so after all these seniorities, experience not counting, then all these people being removed, he will be able to reach out to the people who will really loyal and follow, his direction. So I think in the next 5 years, will be living in the most dangerous time window that very much possible, the highest possibility that the war that will break out in the Western Pacific, And I think after 2030, that possibility average actually will start going down. And after 2035, because China's the population aging really fast and their economy really go down to the toilet really fast. So I think after 2035, the possibility of going to have a war with China is going to be less and less. But the next 5 years is the most difficult time we have to deal with. And then we need to make our military men and women in service better equipped, better trained, and fully ready so we can defend the peace and try to avoid a war.
A lot at stake for sure. Michael Lucci, Nathan Su, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.